All right. Hello, everyone. This is Linda Ford. I'm your host of The Magnetic Woman, this podcast that has not quite launched itself completely, but we're getting there. And I am delighted to have a guest speaker to join me in a conversation that I think is really important. And that is all about how do we navigate change in our life. And the person that I have invited is a delightful human being. Her name is Dr. Sarah Nicholls. And so, welcome, Sarah. Come on in and
Oh,
get cozy.
thank you. Thank you for having me, Linda. It's a delight to be invited.
Yeah, so Sarah and I actually met, I think it was about 6 months ago, wasn't it, Sarah, when I had just moved from the US to Ireland. And Sarah was attending a retreat for women in the town of Killarney, which is kind of half an hour from where I live. And so I got invited up to attend one of your dinners and we hit it off, right? We just
We did.
connected really well. And that's where we met. And I was really interested to find out that Sarah is a doctor of medicine, and that and she's going to tell you her story in a second, and that she was also kind of uh, just crossing over these lines and exploring the whole world of personal development. And I came to discover that she had her own YouTube channel. And so, anyway, Sarah has gone through a big change lately in her life. So that's why I've invited her on here so that we can have a conversation, you and I, Sarah, about what it is. If you could just open up and explain, like, just introduce yourself, what you've been through lately, and then we can just kind of go from there. It's all pretty open
Absolutely.
to wherever you want to go with this.
Thank you. Yeah. Hopefully there'll be some useful lessons for your audience to gain from this. So yeah, thank you again for having me on here. I'm a medical doctor and I work in the emergency department and I have done for several years. And in the last year or so, I've been moving into the coaching sphere to help healthcare professionals overcome people pleasing, perfectionism, and procrastination. And so I've created lots of resources and I do one-to-one coaching to help people with that. And that's been really fulfilling and wonderful and absolutely loving it. And the change that you mentioned there that I've been going through is making the decision to quit full-time medicine. So this has been a huge transition point in my life, for obvious reasons. And it's been a decision that I've been mulling over for a very long time. And I actually made the decision a few years ago, um, and dropped out of the full-time training program as a doctor, the traditional career path, and became a locum doctor. So essentially that means I pick up shifts as and when they're available, a bit like a school supply teacher. I just fill in the gaps when they're needed on the rota. But it's
Right.
only
Yeah.
recently that I've come to terms with that decision and felt like I'm able to talk about it out in the big wide world, and open. I've made a YouTube video about it where I'm talking
Yeah.
about why I made that decision. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah. It's such a huge decision because it's not like, you know, you've been, working in a shop or something, or, you've actually invested a lot of time and energy and money, I guess, right,
Oh yeah.
into becoming a doctor. And I can so relate to it. And I'll talk about my story in a while. But give us a sense of the investment that you have put in
Oh,
those terms.
absolutely. So I took a very long, winding road to becoming a doctor. I assume a lot of your listeners, viewers, are going to be watching from America. Is that right, Linda?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So I probably took a path into medicine that's more similar to the American system rather than the British system, where I did an undergraduate degree before I went to medical school. And I also had a couple of years working. So I started medicine at the age of 23, which is pretty old in the UK. Normally people start 18 or 19.
Yeah.
And while I was at medical school, I dreamed of going for years and years. I worked really hard to get to that point. While I was at medical school, didn't have a lot of money, so had to work part-time during med school to fund my studies. It was very full on, and I've ended up, I think probably pretty it's probably pretty similar to most people. I've ended up with about 60K of student debt. So it's a lot of
Wow.
time, a lot of money,
Yeah.
a lot of effort, several rounds of burnout. And, we'll probably come back to this, but I would do it all again. I feel like I
Of
made the
course.
right decision. I'm glad that I went to medical school. I'm glad that I chose to do all of that. And it's led me to where I am now.
Is this something, Sarah, that were you as a child always wanting to be a doctor? Does this go back a long way for you, or?
When I was a child, I either wanted to be a an actress, an
Yeah, didn't we
author,
all?
or a doctor. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think it was probably watching a bit too much TV. I loved
yeah.
writing stories as well. That was where the author part came in, and the doctor part, I'm not really sure where that came from. I think it's probably because I like fixing things for one thing, but also I just love people, love talking to people. And I thought, oh, if I become a doctor, I'll get to talk to people all day, every day. Maybe I should
Yeah.
have just gone into radio or
So
something
what
like that.
happened? That's what we want to find out. What was the shift that happened
Mm.
that made you go in a different direction or decide that you had to?
To be totally honest with you, it was burnout. It was
Mm,
burnout. I was, I'd worked really hard during medical school. Like I said to you, I was working part-time alongside my studies. I was putting in all hours that were available to me. And I thought, when I start working as a doctor, life's going to be a bit easier for me because I will no longer have to study all hours under the sun. I'll have passed my
mm,
medical school exams. My life will just be work and then leisure time. And I'll be earning money. So I naively thought life would get easier once I qualified. The opposite was true. Although I'd worked in healthcare for many years before becoming a doctor, I had no idea the level of stress and strain that becoming a doctor would put on me. And it was the hours, the long hours that we have to work, and the emotional strain of the job. And that's
mm,
not to say that I didn't enjoy it. I've enjoyed most of my work, but the physical and mental toll that work was putting on me just became too much. I was finding that I was having to say no to big life events, missing weddings, missing
mm,
family events, missing Christmases, and I found that really difficult. And I remember going to one of my best friend's weddings, and I'd I'd just finished a set of night shifts, and I was I tried to get the time off work, but they weren't able to swap my shifts because there weren't enough doctors to be able to swap my shifts, even though I'd asked months in advance. And I was so tired at this wedding. I basically don't have any memory of the wedding.
yeah.
And I remember crying in the toilets at one point, not because I hadn't even been drinking or anything like that. It was just out of pure exhaustion.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought at that point, enough's enough. Something's got to give here.
Mm-hmm. How long did um, that period of discontent lag on for you? Like what kind of not hours, months, years are we looking at here, Sarah?
About 2 years.
2 years. Wow.
Mm, mm,
And so during that 2 years, because I'm really interested in what happens, when you kind of like what was like you had this kind of knowing that this couldn't sustain, this lifestyle
mm.
wasn't sustainable, right?
Yeah.
Um, did you have like moments where you thought, well, I'm just being a bit softer, I need to get, a little bit more stiffer and stronger, and you know, like
Yeah.
like did you have, and what did you talk to other people about it, or?
Very good questions there. So Absolutely, I had those feelings. I felt a lot of shame about feeling burnt out. I felt like, why is everyone else coping and I'm not?
Mm-hmm.
And I I remember complaining to a particular family member on the phone and saying, I came home from work one evening and I just cried all evening because it had been such a terrible day. There'd been a death on the ward. I was in a ward where there was a bit of a toxic environment. Things were just really hard. Came home and just felt totally hopeless. Spoke on the phone to this family member, and they said to me, you don't have to keep doing this. Why are you still doing it if you're not enjoying it? And I thought that was a real moment of clarity for me, because I thought that's absolutely right. I have chosen this. I do have some level of autonomy here, and I can quit if I wanted to. But I decided, I think I carried on working probably for another full time for another 6 months after that. But that was a bit of a turning point for me to realize, oh, I do have some control here. And in terms of talking about it with others and how other people were doing, I've only realized in retrospect that the people that I was working with were all in the same position. We were all burnt out, we were all exhausted, but no one talked about it, because there's this
Interesting.
perfectionism thing in medicine where we're expected to just rise up and just, something traumatic happens, you deal with it, you move on to the next patient. You don't have
Mhm.
time to have a debrief. In theory, that should all happen, but often it doesn't. You just keep moving, you just keep going. You're expected to be robotic and just,
Right.
step up and deal with everyone else's emotions and put yours aside. And if you I'd like to say this culture in medicine is changing, but I do think it's still pretty prevalent. There's a culture of, if you express that you're struggling, that can be seen as a sign of weakness in inverted commas, um, and it can be seen as a professionalism issue. And so I was scared to
Yes.
talk about it. And so I kept it
Yes.
to myself and just pretended everything was fine.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I'm struck by the parallels between what you have described and what I went through many, many years ago, where I went through 6 years of education, got my master's degree, bachelor's, master's, and teacher training to become a teacher, a high school teacher, actually. And I took on a job, and I'll tell you, I knew within the first year that I was on the wrong track. It's not that I didn't want to become a teacher. I love teaching, just like you. You love medicine, you love interaction with patients and all that stuff. And I love teaching, but I knew that the form, the kind of teaching that I was doing was just totally on the wrong track. And I had one of those moments, and you probably had, maybe you did. I'll ask you in a second. But I remember I one of the things I had, teachers had to teach, but then they had like their duties to do, like between class. And one of the duties I had to do was to sit in this very drafty hallway next to the boys' toilets, which was not very pleasant. And they put you in these little, the little seats that the students sit in with the desk lids. And I would sit there and mark, to catch up on my paperwork. But the whole objective was to kind of make sure that nobody was cutting class, right? I had to make sure the hallways were clear and there wasn't anyone suspicious, any students kind of cutting class. And I remember sitting there and having this moment thinking, is this what I have studied hard for? To be sitting in a drafty hallway next to a smelly boys' toilet, in a
Mm,
little seat. And it was just one of those moments where it just hits you, the reality. And I knew from that moment that I had to get out. I
yeah.
was not um, public school. We call it public schools in America, which is your standard school. I was not meant to be in that system. And it was a terrifying realization. It was so terrifying because, like you, Sarah, you spent so much money. Um, you had high ideals about what you wanted, right? And this beautiful vision for your life. And it just and then you have this moment. It's like, I have to change course.
Mm.
And it's a very terrifying feeling,
Yeah.
And so yeah, and so I've done that in my career. But I've also done it in relationships too, just to throw that one out, like just realizing that something isn't working in a relationship and then really having to make a decision. I have to change. I have to get out of this.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
it's about having the courage and the realization of why you need to and how you're going to actually do it, right?
Yeah.
So, which is why I'm really fascinated by these kinds of decisions that we have to make, because for so many, like for the teaching job, it took me a year to make that transition. I had nothing really better to go to, unlike you. I'm going to talk about that in a second, what your plans are. But I didn't really have a plan. All I knew was I just had to get out because I was like you, I was going home crying my eyes out because of the fact that the kids would stir me up so much, the discipline problem,
Mm.
the, you know, I was more of a disciplinarian than a teacher. And so really similar parallels. And,
Mm.
you know, do you think, let me ask you, for me, it took me a year to say, I'm out of here. I had to renew my contract and I just decided I didn't want to. But for you, how, you said this has been going on for 2 years, which in a way it is a long time, but it isn't, especially
Mm.
considering what you've invested in yourself to do.
Mm.
So can you say a little bit about how you have made this transition and what is it you're planning on doing
Yeah.
now? And talk
Yeah.
about the strategy, because you can have a lot of feeling, right, about this, but do you have a plan? What's next?
Mm. Great question. I think that's a lot of
I know I gave you a lot there.
no,
You
there's
just
a
dive in wherever you want.
that yeah, it's very thought provoking. And what's coming up for me that I mean, yes, there is a strategy. There absolutely is a strategy because we've got a mortgage to pay. and
Yeah.
and it's essentially so to answer the question about how I'm doing it, basically, it's probably similar to your situation. I just have not renewed what I'm doing. You know, I've kept my doctor's license, but I have just stepped off the career ladder. And you can kind of just do that and then work as a locum. So I'm very lucky that the hospital that I was
Yes.
working at anyway were willing to hire me as a locum. So it was actually a very seamless transition, and it's been totally fine. But the what you thank you for sharing what you mentioned there about your story with teaching, because I think there are a lot of parallels with not just the story and the realization and this feeling of like, is this it? Is this, is this what I've done all my training for? And then going home crying and everything like that. But there's also the thing that really strikes me about these kinds of big transitions in our lives that probably a lot of our viewers have been through as well, is how much of your identity is wrapped up in that decision.
Mm-hmm.
You once you become a teacher, that's a profession, that's a well-respected profession, and same with medicine. And so not only have you got your own pressures from within, and what should I do, what do I want, what do I not want, how do I do it, what's the strategy here, you've also got this pressure from, or whether it's perceived or or real pressure from external forces, people saying, what are you doing, oh, have you wasted all that time,
Yeah,
um
what did your
what
peers
next?
say to you when when they found out? What kind of reaction did you get?
Oh, well, I mean, I think I'm very lucky that everyone has said things like, we want you to be happy and whatever's best for you. But really, there's a lot of judgment there, and a
I
lot of
bet there is.
questions. And especially from my medical peers, there's most of my non-medical peers, when I've explained to them, what work is like at the moment, how things are with the NHS and the situation with my career and how tough it's been, they seem to fully understand it, because if they're working in corporate jobs, if you're having a terrible time in a corporate job, you just go and find a new job, you go and do something else, even if it's a career switch. It's pretty simple.
Yeah, but the NHS in England is a disaster right now, isn't it?
It is. It's
I mean,
such a shame.
We won't go into that, but
Shame.
just let you know, guys, it's a complete disaster from what I've heard on the news. So
yeah, it really is. It's really sad to see. And yeah, so my medical peers have struggled to understand it, and I think there's a number of reasons for that. I think one is that they don't necessarily see a way out, that we're all experiencing this really tough time. Lots of us are experiencing burnout and exhaustion, and many of my colleagues or friends who are medics can't physically see a way out themselves, and so they just keep going. And when I've said that I'm leaving or doing my own thing or going part-time, they have felt that that's a really difficult thing to come to terms with. And then there's also,
I wouldn't be surprised though, Sarah, sorry to interrupt with you. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a few of them wish they could do it.
Yeah,
a lot of there might be a bit of like a secret jealousy, not jealousy, but just God, I wish I had the courage to do that, but they don't want to own it because they know for whatever reason they have to stay, to pay the mortgage or to overcome their objections,
Absolutely. And there's a lot of risk there.
So, yeah.
And then there's the judgment from my more senior colleagues, and I suppose that's because they have gone up the career ladder and got to the top, and they're kind of like, well, just keep going. There's this thing in medicine that we always hear. It's like just one more year, because there's always that next rung to climb. And I've had so many of my colleagues and coaching clients who've said to me, you're promised this magical golden land at the top of some career ladder, and you just keep climbing and thinking, when I get to there, things will get better and easier. I'll get to there and things will get better and easier, just like I did when I was at medical school. Once I qualify, it'll get better and easier. And then you get there and suddenly you're just like you, sitting in that drafty hallway on that plastic chair. You sit there and you think, is this it?
Yeah.
This is
you're bringing
really
to mind you bring to mind the woman who trained me to coach, Dr. Martha Beck. She's quite famous in America. I don't know if she's in England. She actually is Susan's coach, Susan Hyatt's coach, Martha Beck.
Yeah.
She tells a story because she went to Harvard and did 3 degrees, she got her PhD there. And she had this encounter one time. She tells a story about she had this encounter with her academic advisor at Harvard. And she was just completing her dissertation after all that work. She'd been at Harvard for 10 years and had decided that academia wasn't for her. And it got to the point where when she was typing her dissertation, her academic work, she had such pain in her fingers. She felt physical pain. And when she switched over to type and write her self-help books, which she's written some of the best self-help books out there, she had no pain. And, talk about your body letting you know whether you're on the right track or not, But she got such kickback from these Harvard professors who were saying, you're going to ruin your life, your career, you'll never make any money. And she has outdone all of them, in terms of money, success, and happiness. So anyway, you just kind of brought that to mind.
That's fascinating. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. So what is it that you feel you're called to do? What is it that you want to be doing now? And I think actually, let me just say, I think it's really good that you've still got one foot in there without all the big pressure, right? you probably lose out on some kind of benefits or whatever financial benefits, but it's still, you've got one foot in the world of medicine, but without that pressure, which I understand, it's leaving you with a lot more energy to focus on, well, what is it I do want to build now,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
talk
that's
about
right.
that.
Yeah, and it has left me with in terms of finances, it's left me with a lot of differences in how our income is because we I don't have sick pay, I don't have any of the benefits that come with working full time, annual leave, those kinds of things. You know, I think you call it vacation time in the
Yeah,
US,
yeah.
but um, but I have freedom, and I'm so
Oh,
happy, and I feel so fulfilled. And so what's next for me, and what my big thing is, as you know this, but for the benefit of your listeners, I created a course last year, um, because for my YouTube followers, kind of a personal development course, and from that, my coaching practice has emerged, where people basically took the course and asked me to go into more detail about some of the modules, one to
mhm.
one, and through that, most of the people that I'm working with are healthcare professionals, and I have realised that it's kind of unveiling itself to me, but I think my mission is, and I'm just starting on this track, which is why I'm saying I think, because it's still evolving. I think my mission is to help change the face of how healthcare professionals are living their lives, in terms of not sacrificing everything for work, realizing that there is life outside of a profession, that you can be happy and fulfilled when you get to the top of that career ladder, and that things can be better, that we deserve to live this happy, fulfilled life that we were promised when we got into medical school.
Oh my God, I think you are going to find a lot of clients. And in fact, I have had, in the last year, I've had two clients who were British doctors who are looking for ways to either get out of medicine and find some other work, or to find a better way of doing it so that it's not
Interesting.
what you. I've had two clients, um, and a man and a woman. And so I think this is something, especially the way the whole system in England is just so out of control.
Yeah.
And medical professionals are undoubtedly suffering and having a lot of stress and doubt and insecurity about where they're going, and is this the life that they signed up for. So
Mm,
I think it's a great niche for
thank
you,
you.
you
And
know,
the thing
because
is that
you've
I
lived through it.
I have lived through it, so I really understand the pressures that we're facing. And the thing is, I still love medicine, and I still love my patients, and I still love going to work, and I still love being able to do that. But now I turn up fresh, energized,
Yes,
happy to be there. And I want that for all healthcare professionals. I want that our patients deserve that. I want them to be able to turn up to work, be able to give their best to their job, but then have the energy to still go home and give their best to their
yeah,
spouse, to their children, to their friends, and to themselves, and not feel
exactly.
this pressure that I was experiencing for that 2 years of, work is sapping my energy. I feel like a depleted battery. I have
Yeah,
nothing left to give. And
yeah,
and we deserve better, and our patients deserve better.
absolutely. And that goes across the board for anyone in life. And if I could just go back to what you were saying about the pressure to continue, like if you've invested so much in it, and you're in a way you feel that shame of letting something go, it really speaks to, I think it does anyway, Sarah, it really speaks to how the cultures that we live in society, um it's set up that we have to choose something, or we have to act in a certain way, and there's such pressure to conform. And it's innocent, because we all want to kind of get our careers online, and make money. But if something isn't working, and it's not making you feel whole and complete, and you're, stressed out, then, I mean, you have to kind of step back and think, well, what's going on here, And we're not talking about just stress, the occasional stress. There's stress in every job. But if it becomes a lifestyle, that's when you need to kind of really begin to question, which is why I think a lot of people, I would love your take on this, the difference between feeling that stress and fear of the fear about making change and listening to your intuition to make change, because a lot of people can't distinguish between the two of those. Do you know where I'm going with this? It's like, what do we listen to, our fear, or how do we know it's our higher self talking to us?
Ooh, I
What's your
love that
take on
question.
that?
I will give you my take on that, and afterwards, if you wouldn't mind sharing, I'd love to hear your take on it too.
Yeah.
So, when I first decided I wanted to quit, the decision was probably coming from a place of fear. I was so scared about what my future would look like. How can I keep going like this? My health is deteriorating. I am tired all the time. I'm snappy with my husband. I'm not happy. I'm exhausted. I'm not giving my best to anything. My catchphrase at the time was, I'm living on cortisol, caffeine, and dry shampoo. Because I had no time to sleep. I was stressed all the time, and I didn't even have time to wash my hair.
Mm-hmm.
So my decision was made through fear initially, and then as I thought about it more, I thought, you know what, this process that I'm going through in the decision making, I need to come to this from a place of abundance and a growth mindset, and be making the decision based on, and by that I mean making the decision based on what's best for my ideal future self, rather than running away from problems, because that's just avoidance, and that's got, it's a whole other kettle of fish. I need to make sure that I'm making a decision that's doing the best for my future, and that I'm not going to regret in the future. And so I spent many months thinking about those fears and what they all were, and thinking about what I did want and what I didn't want, and the emotions that were associated with those. And I think was certainly true for me, and I don't know if this applies to you as well, but it definitely applies to a lot of people I interact with, that when we get negative emotions like resentment or anger, irritability, feeling overwhelmed, those kinds of feelings coming up, which I was having all the time, the natural inclination is to want to push them away and to hide from them. And like I said before, it's a shameful thing to be burnt out. When in my industry, you don't admit that to people, you don't talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wanting to push those feelings down. But when I got them out in the open and started journaling about them, talking about them, I realized they're a sign. They're a sign. They're telling me things I don't want. So I needed to listen to those clues, tune into my intuition, and listen to what those clues were telling me. And they were telling me that enough is enough, and that I'm meant for something else. And I have a very deep feeling that nothing is wasted in life. So all the people that were telling me, if you do this, it's a waste. If you jump off the medical career ladder, it's your degree down the pan. That's just not true. That's their fears. That's not true for me, because I don't know about you, but everything I've done in my life has brought me some sort of gift for the present moment. So like years ago, I shared in my YouTube video, I worked in McDonald's. The skills I learned there in some way are brought forward into the current version of me. And in all the other jobs I've done and all the interactions I've had with various people, they all bring you together. They're all brought together into the person you are today. So whether or not I continue being a doctor until I retire, I don't know. But that's something that I will deal with in the future, and I will work out as I go. But what I do know is that it's definitely not wasted, and that perhaps I was meant to do this medical degree, become a doctor, and do all these years of training so that I could be the best coach I can be, or whatever it is that's in my future. I don't know.
Oh, I think that what you're saying is so beautiful. I agree totally with everything you've been saying there, Sarah.
Oh, thank
Um,
you.
I
Hopefully,
just,
your listeners will get some value from that and learn
no,
to trust
it's
themselves as well.
exactly, yeah. And for me, it's always been um, because, whether I was trying to leave a job or a relationship, and I think a lot was in relationships, I really sat on that fence for far too long. And sitting on the fence, I have to tell you, it's such a painful way to live because you're kind of in no man's land, and you're trying to make a decision, but you don't want to make it. And actually, sitting on the fence is when you've decided not to make a decision, but you're just kind of you spend all your time just thinking and thinking and thinking about the pros and cons. And it's not that we shouldn't do that. We need to we need to weigh and think carefully about decisions, but not if it's going to go on for years and years like it did for me. I mean, I spent 5 years sitting on the fence in a relationship that I knew kind of wasn't working, but I was so afraid, that fear of moving out or closing it down and moving on, that my life, all areas of my life became a standstill. I just couldn't. And it was like you're saying, you're carrying this heavy weight. And so even though I had getting back to intuition and fear, sometimes he would go out of town on business. And I have to say, when I had those moments, I would have this like giddy sense of freedom that I just loved, because he wasn't around. And but then he'd come back, and then I'd feel that heaviness again. So I think that's, to me, how I get to distinguish is, um, does your life feel heavy and burdened? And it's kind of like constricted. You feel constricted in your body, or do you feel, when you think about what you'd really like to do, there's a kind of expansiveness, isn't there? There's a kind of openness, like you said, freedom. And that, like, if you can learn to tune into those two, the difference between the two, um, and just be honest about it. Are you feeling an expansiveness, or are you feeling a contraction? To me,
Such a good way to
that's,
describe it.
yeah, it's again, Martha Beck tuned me into that, because she's really about letting your body speak to you. There was something else I was going to say. Oh yeah, there's a really beautiful quote by the Buddha, if I can remember. I'll just give you the paraphrase of it. He said, you can always tell the ocean by the fact that it tastes of salt. And you can always tell the truth because it feels like freedom. Isn't that beautiful? The truth feels like freedom. So the truth of what you want to do, the truth of what's not working in your life and what could work, just notice the difference. Like, one, that again, it's that contraction or expansion, So that's how I navigate anyway. And again, it's not that we make these decisions lightly. We don't throw a life away haphazardly, right? I mean, there has to be some thought and concern, but if it's leading to years and years of rumination and sitting on the fence, then I think you might want to get a coach or talk to someone about what's keeping you stuck there, But
Absolutely. And I loved
I
what you
think the
said
work.
there, Linda.
I love the work, though, that you're, at least you think that's the direction that you're being called in. And my God, is that going to be helpful to so many practitioners, doctors, even nurses, right? Just how to deal with the stress. Is that the focus, to deal with the stress, or what is it specifically?
100%.
Yeah.
to deal with the stress, and to the stress is the key part of it. So I say that I work with people pleasers, perfectionists, and procrastination, the people who deal with procrastination, because those are the three main symptoms that people seem to have with when they're stuck in this stress cycle, this feeling of overwhelm at work. And in healthcare, those are the three things that seem to show up in people. But ultimately, the stress is the biggest problem.
Okay. So before we close out here, Sarah, and I want to thank you for being so inspiring and having the courage to follow your North Star. It's it's a great thing if you can do it, you know. And I love the fact that we didn't touch on the fact is if you do make a change and you decide to give something up or leave something and go on, you might fail. And I love what you were saying about it's like nothing is lost. And I think the more that we can become really good at failing, and like you said, have that growth mindset, that how can ultimately you cannot go wrong. But failure is all part of it, you know. When I left, just to end up here, when I left my teaching job, I actually had to swallow a bitter pill because I didn't know what other job to get. And I had to go back to being a secretary. Nothing wrong with being a secretary if that's what you love. But for me, I had spent years doing that. And finally I went and got my degrees and became a teacher and got out of that. And then when I left teaching, I had to go back again. And I took on this job, low pay. I was way overqualified for it, but I did it because it's all I could get. But I'll tell you, that job hooked me up with a woman. It was in international development, but it hooked me up with this woman who saw something in me. And she said, would you like to come and be my assistant? I need someone to work on a project. And that job and that invitation took me all over the world. And I was mixing in high circles, going to lunches at the World Bank and the UN. And the greatest thing that came out of it was that I met my husband through that job. And
Oh,
so, you know, it's like you just don't know. And
nothing is wasted.
this is the other thing that happened, and I swear by this, that if you have the courage to really follow your intuition carefully, strategically as well, but if you hold tight to who you really are and believe in yourself, I'm telling you, there were doors that opened up in my life so fast when I made that jump, when I made that leap. And you're going to find that too, Sarah, that once you commit yourself to doing that, it's like, and you follow your intuition, you follow your heart, you're gonna find doors opening all over the place, and you're going to discover doors that you never even knew were there. And I swear that has happened to me whenever I've made a leap.
Oh, I just got chills when you said that. I think maybe that's another sign about following your
Yes,
intuition, that if it's that
yes.
expansive thing, those doors are opening.
They are what Martha Beck calls the chills of truth.
Oh, okay. So that's what I've just experienced.
Yeah, yeah. So, Sarah, just before we end up here, and I have a quote I want to read, but I want you to kind of tell our readers, listeners rather, if somebody's trying to make a decision about making a big change, what would can you give a few steps? People like
Yeah,
steps, right?
people do like steps. This probably isn't going to be a fully fleshed out
That's
step-by-step
okay.
approach, but the things that I say, that if you're stuck in a place where you want to find some clarity and you want to make a big decision, the things that I say are really important are, number one, obviously, you know, you've got all your pros and cons and you've thought about it and you've been ruminating about it for a long time. But number one is getting to a place where life just feels easy and fun. So that sounds counterintuitive, but when we're feeling stuck and we don't have clarity, I think that can add extra stress to our lives. So if you're already in a stressful position, trying to make a big decision on top of that adds stress. And I think it's important to pull back from that. So the way that I describe this is, imagine, we've all had the experience where we've been on vacation, and you've got things that are going on at home, work stress, life stress. You're on vacation. A few days into the vacation, you feel like ideas are just coming to you, and you might be able to solve a few problems from work or a few things from your life just because you're in that state of relaxation. And so one of the things I suggest if you're trying to make a big decision in your life is to give yourself the chance to make life feel a bit easier and more fun. Get into that vacation mindset, whether it's actually taking a vacation or doing some things in your free time that feel fun and frivolous. Sounds counterintuitive, but that's one of the things. Second thing, and final thing that I'll just say there is, it sounds easier than it's easier said than done. Leaning into self-trust. This is the most important part, I think, of any of this. Learning to understand that you can trust yourself. Whichever decision you make is the right one. And learning to realize that regret is a choice. And if you make either decision, whichever outcome it is, you can trust yourself to deal with the outcome of that decision.
Beautiful, beautiful. Oh, so inspiring. So I don't know if you've heard this quote. I'm going to read it here. I pulled it up here. I actually found this quote many years ago in one of all places, one of my husband's climbing books. He's a climber, a hiker and a climber, an ice climber, although I don't allow him to do ice climbing anymore. But anyway, there's a famous quote by a guy, a climber, William Murray. And he says this fantastic quote. It says, until one is committed, there is hesitancy, the chance to draw back, always ineffectiveness. Concerning all acts of initiative and creation, there is one elementary truth, the ignorance of which kills countless ideas and splendid plans, that the moment one definitely commits oneself, then providence moves too. All sorts of things occur to help one that would never otherwise have occurred. A whole stream of events issues from the decision, raising in one's favor all manner of unforeseen incidents and meetings and material assistance, which no man could have dreamt would have come his way. I have learned a deep respect from one of Goethe's couplets. This is the philosopher Goethe. Whatever you can do or dream, you can begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. Beautiful, huh?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
You have to read this a few times to really get it, but it's gorgeous, and I'll post it in the show notes. And I will post all of your links so that people can go to your YouTube site. Sarah is amazing at doing videos. She is such an expert, and she makes it.
Thank you, Linda.
And her editing skills are, I have to figure out how you do what you do. So, Sarah, thank you. I'm going to close off now, but hang out because I want to have a chat with you. And thank you so much for being inspiring. We need inspiration today. Boy, do we. And we do not have to live the life that we don't want to live. Right?
Absolutely. I love that to end on. Thanks, Linda. Thank you for having me.
You're most welcome.